welcome back to The Rotation. I'm your co-host, Regina.
I'm your other co-host, Jordan. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about the art of sound in academia, digital media, and contemporary culture. Today, we have a guest speaker, Dr. Corinna Lsughlin, joining us in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. And we just want to start with small questions. How are you doing?
Okay.
How are you feeling? This is your second podcast of today. How are you doing today?
I'm good. We're back from spring break, which is a little shocking because my spring break was relaxing and I had
Did you go anywhere?
I did a writing retreat with LMU,
okay.
in Simi Valley at this camp up there, and it was really fun. I got to hang out with my colleagues.
Nice.
Got pulled over by the police with another professor here.
Oh, were you all speeding?
No, and he just let us go. It was all fine. But it was dramatic. Yeah, dramatic moment.
Good story to tell.
Yeah, seems like a good...
So we went through and we read not your book, but a couple of the works that you have published over the years.
Oh, thank you.
So a few that we have listed on here, we have #AmplifyWomen, the emergence of an evangelical feminist public on social media. And we have God is my sponsored ad, my algorithm, the spiritual algorithmic imagery in Christian TikTok. So my question with that is, a lot of your focus is religion in the new age of social media. So what really is your inspiration with that?
You know, I was a religious studies major when I was in college at UC Santa Barbara, and I grew up partially in the evangelical tradition. My family wasn't evangelical. I don't come from an evangelical family, but I went to a youth group and I went to church when I was in high school and got really into that sort of scene. And it's such a prominent part of American culture, evangelical culture, and it's so influential that I got really interested in it, and I ended up moving into communication because I started to get interested in the way that evangelicals were using digital media, which ended up being my dissertation and it ended up being my first book. I found there to be a really religious outlook on digital media that was interesting.
When I read it, I thought it was really interesting how you were talking about how a lot of Christian TikTokers kind of use the algorithm as the hand of God in a certain way, and I thought that was a really interesting take. The article that you've written that we really want to focus on today is The Millennial Medium, the interpretive community of early podcast professionals, because obviously that one has the most to do with actual podcasting. So first and foremost, how do you define an interpretive community?
Great question, and that's not my term, I should say. But an interpretive community is just like any community you might be a part of, like an intellectual community or a professional community. It was used also to talk about journalism, professional community where norms and values are kind of established. So for example, with journalists, journalism has just kind of evolved, and there isn't necessarily a ethical code written down on stone tablets, right? But if you've done something wrong, because your community will be that person, did something wrong,
accountability,
right?
Accountability
and all these things, and the way that values are kind of negotiated in especially professional communities or communities with a collective purpose.
That makes sense.
And I think on that note, how do you think financial stability work within the podcast space? We know from our experiences that revenue is mainly made from advertisements, and so we were just wondering, can small creators make a viable income to just sustain them with doing podcasts? So in your own thoughts, now talking about this article, how do you think that financial stability work within this podcast space?
It's such a great question. I think that if you have a good idea, you can. I think it takes a really long time to build an audience from scratch, from zero, but I think it's possible. I also think relying on celebrity podcasts is not always the best bet, right? So Spotify gave, Kim Kardashian some huge sum of money and she ended up not really kind of delivering for them, right? So you don't really know, if you're looking at it from the business side, what's actually going to work. I think it's unfortunate because, when I first started really getting into podcasts and podcasting, people weren't doing it for the money. It was just for fun. And there was something kind of special about that, because it was just I'm obsessed with this topic. I just want to talk about it. Or I want to take you into my obsession, right? And now sometimes you could feel that people have found a hook that they think can get an audience, and it feels a little more contrived and less sort of natural or authentic. So the podcast industry has been really interesting to me as a scholar of digital media because it's evolved so quickly into what it is now, which is a multi-hundreds of millions of dollar industry.
So you really think it's more like commercialized now?
It's much more commercialized, right? And now, you know, if you don't have the backing of like a larger production company behind you, it's going to be a lot harder to break through the noise. And that's just a fact. And I think in general, if you want to have a podcast, you have to love podcasting, even if you are going to make money off of it, right? Because you have to do it a lot. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's like an easy way to like become a celebrity or make money. It might be easier doing that on TikTok or Instagram now.
Kind of going off of that, in your article you talk a lot about how the reason that the podcasting space was created was for the purpose of authenticity and kind of bringing journalism back to a more democratic scene, because it felt like the radio industry was being very commercialized and kind of taken over by these really big corporations. Towards the end of your article, you kind of started to talk about how the podcasting industry, with it being a lot of celebrity shows, it is kind of going in the same direction as the radio industry originally did, as what the podcasters were trying to get out of when they left the radio industry. My question is, how can we as a community of podcasters move back towards the original goals of democracy, transparency, and authenticity that the space was rooted in originally?
What a fantastic question. I mean, I think you just do it, right? And build a community around it, right? If those are your values and you're really into it and passionate about it, then you can live those values and be into it and passionate about it. And if there's other people that'll do it with you, then that's how it starts.
Yeah.
I think with anything with media, you just do it, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you want to be a filmmaker, you just make those films and put them out there. And I've seen this happen in, you know, people's lives. My contemporaries, my peers started doing things on YouTube and then got on TV or became producers, right?
Do you have any like podcast recommendations of people who you think are in the industry who are exemplifying those values?
Oh, there are so many. I mean, I'm really interested in long form storytelling and the way that can be done in podcasting. But yeah, I listened to this great podcast that I just thought was really a phenomenal kind of documentary called Mother Country Radicals by Zaid Dorn. This is a couple years ago, but that was one that when you think about all the stuff out there that does feel a little bit contrived to try and find an audience or to have a hook, it was something that felt like really deeply felt and authentic.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's so much out there that there's a lot of great stuff too.
No, totally. Moving on.
We would like to dive in a little bit more into the discussion of today that is based on what we have been studying in class. So first, we want to know what drew you to study sound and its social impact.
I'm, you know, a scholar of digital media, and, you know, when I was a graduate student, started podcasting with kind of a group of other grad students who was really interested in digital media. And I'll just say, you know, again, I think it was something that at the time felt really empowering. And I still think with podcasting, what's so great about it is that it doesn't really require you to be an expert, right? It's not like broadcasting. You can be a podcaster and just get your passion out there with not a lot of tools, with not a lot of overhead, not a lot of expense. And so I think that's what's special about it. And if you have just the basics of understanding sound and audio editing, you can do it. And I'm always trying to get students to do that and feel that empowerment that digital media, when it's at its best, can be.
I think that kind of goes exactly into our next question. I mean, you already kind of talked about how it really is your desire to get students to interact with that digital media, but why did you feel that LMU specifically needed sound studies? We do already have a lot of classes that deal with digital media. We have our public speaking classes. We have your class, media studies. So why specifically podcasting?
So there's like kind of a very boring answer to that.
Okay.
Which is that when I was hired here in 2018, I was hired to develop a series of classes that would incorporate media making, because I was coming from grad school where I had been involved in a lot of like documentary filmmaking and media making and podcasting and stuff like that. So that's what I was kind of hired to do. And so that's where the class came from. But it was the class that I pitched like in my interview all those years ago. And again, I think for us, especially in communication studies, we don't have the tools that they have in SFTV. Podcasting is kind of perfect, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a way to make media that doesn't require you to have like a $20,000 camera.
No, definitely, yeah. I mean, this one I'm pretty sure is really expensive.
It's probably very expensive.
So with that, first off, I'm personally curious, what were the other classes that you
I
had
teach
in
a
mind?
class, Documentary in the Digital Age, right? Where we make documentaries, right?
Oh,
so
cool.
from kind of a very DIY kind of framework of let's
nice.
just do it. Yeah. And we have developed this digital media minor. We just accepted our first cohort in, and it's going to have more classes that are kind of about creating digital media, even stuff like coding and things like that.
I'm a senior.
No, that's what I'm thinking right now. I'm like, wait,
Sorry.
I'm leaving. It's okay. I'll recover. So
We want to know what you have learned since coming to teach here at LMU that you didn't know before? You have brought a lot to LMU and to us, but what has LMU brought to you?
So much. I mean, it's been such a great experience. I really love LMU. I really think that the mission is like alive, especially among the faculty and the students here, and it's a really special place to be.
Well, with that, we did a little bit of digging into where you were before LMU. Okay. And you did grad school in New York City?
I went to NYU and then I went to Penn, which is in Philly.
So we just kind of want to know, like, what are the differences and similarities between being there, being here? What did you notice? If you did prefer anything, what did you prefer?
It's really interesting. I think every university has its own kind of culture. I mean, NYU is great because there's like no campus. You're just like in the city and you're kind of just like, it really just feels like the city is your campus and it's really cool. The University of Pennsylvania is this beautiful old Ivy League in the middle of this like beautiful, insane city of Philadelphia. And it's huge and just like amazing. And it has its culture as well. And then, you know, LMU is this like sort of smaller, sort of almost like sanctuary on the hill. I always tell people it doesn't even feel like we're in LA.
No, definitely.
You know, like we're in LA, but it feels like we're in this like beautiful sort of scene apart from LA, which I like that a lot. I think it's special.
That's what I always tell people. I'm like, guys, I live in a little LMU bubble. And then
enjoy it.
Yeah, I know.
It's really good. I think we do have a follow-up question for that one.
Okay.
We've been learning a lot about soundscapes, and our group noticed very different things about campus, and I think that speaks to our experiences. But now that you talk about the different cultures, what are like some soundscapes that you like vividly still remember from like each of the places that you've been?
Wow, what a fun question. So New York is a noisy city. People are outside more. Their apartments are small, so they're out in the streets more and out and doing stuff. It's also, you know, the subways, and I mean, it's just, it's very noisy in a very vibrant, fun way that gives it a lot of energy. And Philadelphia is similar in a lot of ways. You know, there are still horses in Philadelphia occasionally. It still has like this sort of like antique feel to it. And then the soundscape here is its own thing.
Kind of moving along, but also still on the topic of soundscapes. We've been learning a lot about how soundscapes have kind of evolved over the last few centuries, you know, with the invention of things such as the gramophone and other audio inventions that are able to capture sound and mimic it almost, and how that changes soundscapes and how it makes them either less authentic or more authentic, or how it can transfer and ideas. So kind of similar to questions that you were asked prior, what role do you see the new technological advancements as such as AI and machine learning playing in the future of specifically audio art, but also visual art?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to predict. I do think there will be a backlash to AI and emphasis on authenticity and the kind of scratches and things that AI seems to like never really have, because it seems like very smooth in a way. It's an aesthetic that is sort of new now, but I can see it getting
Humans
old
want
fast.
messy.
I think so, right?
That question reminded me, I don't know if you watched the Oscars.
I wasn't able to watch it, unfortunately.
Well, Timothée Chalamet lost. He learned how to sing for 5 years and did all the work, and you know, his soul and like all of what he is into the film. And then the actor that actually won used AI.
Oh my gosh,
and
really?
he won, and Timothée Chalamet like lost, and that's the backlash I think you were talking about, where a lot of people were divided. It was like, no, but he's working smarter, not harder. But we're supposed to reward people that have done the work.
Right, artistic skill and discipline. Yeah, it's interesting.
I think with that brings us to our next question. Okay. In your experience, how does audio storytelling differ from written or visual mediums in terms of impact?
When I wrote that article that we were talking about, the millennial medium, it came out of a series of interviews with media makers, with podcasters, and one thing that they emphasized a lot was intimacy. When you have someone speaking directly into your ears, there's this sort of like intimate connection that you have that's almost more intimate because you don't see them. It's almost like a whisper. It can be really feel more direct and more personal and more like interpersonal communication than mass communication. And I think that's what's really special about it. And I think that's why podcasting has a particular sort of power and appeal.
Yeah, I have never thought it about that way before.
So with that, how do you believe noise can be used for protest? Is it an effective medium, or how have you witnessed it?
I think noise is often part of protest, right? And music, and there's a long tradition of that. And noise is disruptive, and protest is trying to disrupt for positive ends. So I think noise is really important to protest.
All college students are right in the thick of midterm season, experiencing a spike in the quantity of work and studying hard for exams, working on projects, and essays.
One of the best ways we stay locked in and prepared for long nights and library sessions is through getting a second win from energy drinks.
The rotation's favorite, Celsius's higher-performing energy drinks.
Celsius was created for people with an active lifestyle and focuses on good ingredients, turning away from artificial preservatives and flavors, helping us stay healthy and ready for anything midterm season throws at us.
Some of our cast and crew favorite picks are Strawberry Lemonade, Oasis Vibe, and Tropical Vibe. Go pick up Celsius at a local grocery store near you.
We're back to the rotation after a short ad break. So once again, we've been learning a lot in this class, and we have a lot of readings, not a lot of readings, but essential readings, I would say. And something that caught the eye of all of us in our group was this big controversy about, I want to say, an implant that goes in the ear.
Cochlear
implant. Yes. And kind of the controversy around it, where the deaf community or hard of hearing, their culture, they don't see them as a disability necessarily, and they feel like these medical professionals trying to take away that culture. But in the other hand, they're saying, well, we're trying to improve their quality of life. And so we were all very divided into, do we support them because it's their culture, but also they could have a better quality of life. And we just thought it would be really interesting to hear your thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I think disability studies scholars have what is, I guess I would think of it as kind of an anti-fascist orientation towards disability, that we don't automatically have to think about disability as bad or negative or lesser than thing, right?
Yeah.
A person can be a person and have a disability, and it doesn't take away any part of their personhood, right? Yeah. So if we think about things like that, which is not the way that our culture trains us to think about things, and we take that disability studies perspective, then the idea of cochlear implants becomes more complicated, right? Because why are we trying to fix something that maybe isn't broken, or why are we considering this something that is broken? But at the same time, there's also a lot of people in the deaf community who welcome cochlear implants, and it's also becoming much more normalized. I know many children with them now who would have previously probably learned to sign are not learning that and not kind of becoming part of that, or not identifying as deaf because they have these implants.
And do you think with that comes with more of the parents' desire for them to be normal, or to have a
quote unquote normal?
Normal?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I did the physical but not the verbal. But yeah, do you think it's more the parents not wanting them to be part of the community, or they don't want them to grow up being bullied, whereas maybe they would grow up and just be happily being part of the community?
Right, and it's really hard to know. I think as a parent, I would probably do the same. You always want to give your kids the best shot in life and give them whatever you can. But I think those disability studies or those disability activists would say we don't need to automatically assume this is a bad thing that needs to be fixed.
Kind of bouncing off of that question, how do you believe noise can be discriminatory then? Because obviously it seems in a way, having the appeal of a cochlear implant can be discriminatory against the deaf community. So do you think that noise can be discriminatory against other communities, other marginalized communities? Can it be racialized? Can it be sexualized?
Sure, that happens within us, right?
Okay.
So the noise itself is neutral until we give shape to it in culture. So it's our biases that make it racialized or...
Can you think of an example of that you have witnessed?
The example that I would think of is the different kinds of music that we think of as, if someone's blasting classical music, right? Are we going to call the cops on them? Or if somebody's blasting a different kind of music that we might think of as within a cultural framework as aggressive or something like that, right? That's our bias coming into it and saying that kind of music is wrong or dangerous or has all these sort of cultural signals attached to it.
It's the mental associations rather than the noise itself.
It's the cultural ones. Yeah, absolutely.
We would like to segue into Lost Hills, the podcast that we have been listening to throughout the semester so far. So this season is about Matrice Richardson. She was a young Black woman who was arrested by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Almost a year later, she was found dead in a canyon, and her case is still a mystery. So how does the podcasting industry highlight or overlook cases in marginalized community, and how can sound studies reveal these patterns?
I think that this true crime podcast by Dana Goodyear, the Lost Hills podcast, is problematic in a lot of ways that we have to be attuned to. And I think that thinking through them is really useful for people like you, right? Media makers. We can look to this as a way to think through what our own ethical codes would be. Going back to that idea of interpretive communities, right? What is right for us? And we at LMU are very well poised to do that, right? We're always talking about ethics at this university.
We are.
As we we're wrapping up, we do have one last part that we would like
Sure.
to talk to you about. The podcast has gained a lot of popularity in the last few years in entertainment. More recently, podcasts are becoming a source of information for academia as well. So my question is, how do you see the relationship between an academia discourse and podcasting evolving? And like, do you really think it's a credible source for information?
I think it can be. It's just like anything else, right? We have access to all of this information, but so much of it is poisoned and bad, right? So it's about media literacy and, being able to evaluate, where is this coming from? Is this a credible source? Is this an actual journalist or an academic, or is this somebody who might just be spitting out things that aren't true? So I think that it's important to have discernment and to try and figure that out and to be careful, right? We might say like, this is just fun, but there's a lot of bad information out there because there aren't gatekeepers, which is, again, a double-edged sword kind of thing.
With that, what do you think then makes a good, incredible podcast?
I think it's important to still have sourcing, right? To still have solid research, to have, some sort of ethics, whether it's journalistic ethics or research ethics that we're trained in the academy. Because I have seen some, people do things that are really questionable. I had a friend whose brother died and somebody tried to make a podcast about his death, which was just an accidental death, and didn't tell her, and he wanted to make it a true crime documentary, but it wasn't a crime.
Right.
And it was really traumatizing and terrible for her.
Yeah.
Because they never came to her and said, hey, we want to do this, and can we interview you? It was just like trying to take somebody who died in kind of an upsetting way.
Very insensitive.
Right. And there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's completely understandable. Overall, we really appreciate your responses today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but we thank you so much for sitting with us and giving us all of your opinions on podcasting and digital media, etc., etc. Once again, I'm Jordan.
And I'm Regina.
And you are with The Rotation. Tune in next time for our next session.